It's great to be here today. So I've given 25 years of my life to caring for people with epilepsy and other neurological disorders. And without question, the development of this programme, the creation of a cohort of expert nurses whose value has been unequivocally demonstrated here in the SENSE study, is about the most exciting development, and despite being one of only a great many people who worked together on this, one of the proudest moments of my professional life. It's not just the fact of these fantastically capable, highly professional and dedicated colleagues, but it's the sense of possibility they engender for the future of healthcare. So 50 years ago, this year, 1967, the year of my birth, it was a balmy evening in Cape Town, South Africa. 22-year-old Denise Darval was run over by a car. She was brought to Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. Now, I'm sure there were no trolleys in the ED in those days, but it really mattered little to poor Denise and her family. Her injury was so severe that she was declared brain dead within hours of admission. Her father, Edward Darval, agreed to donation of his daughter's kidneys. This was becoming routine. The first kidney transplant was performed in old alma mater of mine, the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston, 1954. But Mr. Darval was then presented with an unusual request: the donation of Denise's heart. The recipient was to be a 53-year-old grocer named Louis Wachowski, who was in chronic heart failure after developing rheumatic fever as a child. The Darvals agreed, and Dr. Christian Bernard and his team of 18 doctors, nurses, technicians started the operation shortly after midnight on December 2nd on a Saturday night, and completed 6 a.m. the following morning. The new heart was put in the chest of Louis Wachowski, was electrically shocked into action, and he regained consciousness and said hello to everyone. Now, this single event, in my opinion, like no other in the history of medicine, has captured the heroic spirit of the possibility of Western medicine. Surely there has been amazing advances in the 20th century, the discovery of penicillin, insulin, the possibility that chemotherapy could cure cancer, but none of them quite matched up to taking the heart of a dead person and transplanting it into another human being. Mr. Wachowski's condition deteriorated and he died 18 days after the heart transplant, but it was almost an afterthought. The possibilities were endless. And really those years from the mid-60s up until the early 90s were what might call the golden era of hospital medicine. There was no antibiotic resistance, no waiting lists, no trolleys. I remember in 1978, I was 9. I fell from a garden gate while acting the maggot, fell onto a wooden spike that went into my mouth. Luckily, I was laughing a lot and my mouth was open. If it had been closed, I don't know what it would have been like. But the spike went through my tongue and pierced my tongue. So I remember a lot of sheets and blood and towels, and then I was whisked off to the emergency, well, as it was known then as the casualty department in St. Vincent's Hospital. So my dad drove up to the door of the hospital, and we walked 4 feet into the department. We were met by a nurse in this ridiculous deaconess, long hat, who looked at me and ushered me straight into the treatment area, where a doctor who smelled heavily of tobacco smoke examined me, declared me fine, gave me a mouthwash and sent me home. It took about 25 minutes. The only treatment was that I wasn't a speaker for a few days, but it elicited general hilarity among the calm atmosphere of the ED. Of course, there was no such thing as keeping extensive notes or situational awareness for medical error or tests done out of defensiveness or necessity. So the experience of the ED now is obviously very different. We winged our way through the 70s and 80s in clean clinical environments, crisp white uniforms that never got dirty, and illness was banished at the door. Who could be not seduced in becoming a doctor in such heroism and display? And then one night in 1992, I was a first-year SHO. I was on call in Nina General Hospital, coming to the end of a 54-hour shift. And I was the only senior decision maker in the hospital and in medicine. So a man came in having an MI. And suddenly there was stuff to do. I had to give a new clot-busting drug that thinned the blood to water. I had to worry the man's family and myself about the possibility of bleeding out. There was a 6% chance that he would have a massive clinically relevant hemorrhage. That's nothing, 6%. But it was something, and it was the stage of people living beyond mere episodes of care, becoming chronically sick, requiring multidisciplinary care, living now instead of dying, living to develop diabetes and hypertension and dementia. I never met a demented person the whole year I lived in Nina, in my time in the hospital in medicine. Obviously late onset epilepsy, and of course this was predictable, because when you put a brand new heart into someone, you expect that they would live on. The average heart transplant patient now lives for 15 years post-transplant. Surely you would expect a whole new model of healthcare was required to keep people well and living and thriving. Chronic disease management schedule. And what happened? Well, whatever happened, it wasn't enough to avoid the so-called crisis that we've been in for a decade. Now, I use the word advisedly because I don't think you can call it a crisis that's gone on for 10 years. And what we're witnessing today all over the Western world, by the way, not just in Ireland, is this significant problem of waiting for emergency care, for urgent care. And while at some level it is a political failure, it almost never the fault of the current government, nor even the previous one, nor the one before that, but possibly the one before that. Healthcare innovations take sometimes decades to bear fruit, and so it's a failure of civic society and how it organises and incentivises politics to fix the so-called wicked problems: war, environmental decay, healthcare delivery, education, etc. So maybe in a lucid moment we can all acknowledge this form of wicked problem, and we can sit down together and trust that we're all in this together and that there's no easy answers and that investment now will get nobody any immediate political capital. Remember the scorn that was poured on Mary Harney when she wanted to reduce the number of cancer centres. Second time Mary Harney's been mentioned today. And this is paying off now, and some may even begrudgingly accept that. And so there's with a binding trust in the difficulty of the problem, we can put our finest minds on the problem of care, try everything to fix it, make mistakes, not judge each other at every failure. But no, what we have now is this bizarre standoff where the body charged with by our citizens with organising our healthcare, the HSE, take continuous body blows daily from the frontline staff with loud hailers in the media, despite the fact that they will sit on committees together and there's no solutions that ever arise. Despite the appearance of this, solutions in 140 characters get much more traction in the media than anything else. Is there any media here, by the way? No, funny enough. So the absence of this trust, this basic trust in the nature of the problem, the difficulty, means that we're just not going to make progress. So what's this got to do with specialist nurses in epilepsy? Well, just about everything really, because at the heart of our concerns when the HSE, in an enlightened move by the way, funded this programme despite the worst financial crisis in our history, was the plight of our patients ending up in the emergency room, waiting on trolleys, getting easy access, getting no access to expert opinion. So we began to collect data. You remember that thing? That devalued thing that nobody trusts anymore in the post-truth world. So first of all, we asked the ED docs, do you think too many people are being admitted with epilepsy? They didn't know. Well, they told us, well, all we know is that when we look around the emergency department, about 20 to 30% of people don't need to be here. We don't know where they need to be, but they don't need to be here. So we started to collect information. And what we found was that when a person came into the ED, about 50% of them got admitted. Is that the correct number? Nobody knew. How many people should be admitted, on average, in a year who have a seizure? So if there's 5,000 or 6,000 admissions in Ireland through the emergency room with epilepsy, that's about 3,000 getting admitted. Who's to say that was the wrong number? So we said, okay, we'll do two things. We'll write down a pathway, we'll get a group of experts together, and put a pathway together, and we'll tell you, use some simple algorithms to tell you whether they need to be admitted or not. Okay, that's a good idea, because we don't think too hard about these things, we just mostly admit people. So that was fine, so we did that, and then we said, and we'll do another thing. Once you've filled out the pathway, we'll give it to a specialist nurse, and she'll follow up the patient, she'll ring the patient, and then she'll find out when they need to be seen. And if they need to be seen tomorrow, they'll see them. Oh, we don't like that bit. We prefer that bit, actually. So it turns out that 15, 20 editions of the pathway later, they don't really like pathways, but they love the bit about, if we let this person home, a nurse will call them tomorrow. Oh, well, we love that bit. So I gave up. I didn't give up. The pathway is still in use. But by far the most important issue is the ability, the fact that these ED docs now, they know this person's not being discharged to an 18-month waiting list. They're being discharged for a phone call within a couple of days and possibly a visit within a couple of days. And that's the single most important factor in this program. So what happened when we did that? You know what? Funnily enough, about 20 to 30% of admissions reduced. There's that number again, 30%. So 30% of people didn't need to come in. So the number went from 50% down to 20, 25%. Oh, that's interesting. What about COPD and diabetes and all the reasons that people are in the ED? Is there any reason to believe when there's no data? Nobody believes data anymore, but there is no data to support those other things. But is there any reason to believe it's any different? Chronic diseases that people get that cause them occasionally to get exacerbations for various reasons and end up in the hospital. Is there any reason to believe that if you had these cohorts of specialist nurses and the ability to follow them up immediately, that you wouldn't get the same data? There's absolutely no reason to believe that. So, the average heart transplant, I said, lives for about 12 to 15 years. Using those numbers, if Mr. Washansky had lived, he'd have been alive for the Argentina World Cup, the opening of Star Wars. But he wouldn't have lived to see the mess that we've got into in Western medicine. He would have not benefited from what is absolutely required, is this iterative care, this small incremental care that Atul Gawande did an article 2 weeks ago in the New Yorker calling this combination of outpatient specialist care and primary care working together to give incremental care to people with chronic illnesses. And that is the future of medicine, and that's the thing that will keep you alive, not the heroic stuff anymore. We're gone beyond that. Now the problem is that getting space within the political and media environment for that message is impossible. So when Agnes said we're going to launch this Sense project, I said no one's going to come. Oh, the minister's coming. I don't care, no one's going to come. Peter launched a document on his strategy for epilepsy. The media didn't come. We launched our program for the next 5 years. The media didn't come. They don't care. So I wanted to put this in about we'll solve the trolley crisis. And of course, we had to get the okay from the department to say we were going to do that. So it got delayed and the media invite went out only a couple of days ago. But it just shows you there is no space for this kind of argument. And the future is here. This is the answer to the problem of the ED, in my opinion. But it requires an environment of trust, and it requires making mistakes. I mean, we took 5 years. We went through 14 different iterations of the pathway. It requires a level of trust to get things done as a group. And I don't know the answer to that. I've said a lot of things that I know here today. I don't know the answer, how to fix this. Thank you.